Or page 84, Kuzari. We're still in the middle of this discussion between the rabbi and the Kuzari about Aristotle. When we talk about Aristotle, the philosophy of Aristotle is the equivalent of what today would be considered science. Everybody was convinced that this was the person in the world who was correct. This Greek philosophy, that's it. This is fact. This is all logical. This all makes sense. This is all... The Greek philosophy, by the way, in Kabbalistic terms, brought a lot of destruction to the world. Because what it did do for us, and I don't know how many of us are familiar with this notion, and maybe it's too philosophical to bring up here, but Aristotelian logic is not Jewish logic. Jewish logic, especially Kabbalistic logic, is very often a paradoxical. It seems like two things are contradicting, and really the answer is some third option that exists between them, and according to Aristotelian logic, there's no room for such logic. If A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C, only according to Aristotle. See, there could be things in Judaism where A equals B and B equals C, but A does not equal C. There are things where if you subtract one thing from the other, you'll get one number, but if you subtract the same thing from the other one, it's not true. In Aristotelian logic, that can't work out. They brought a lot of destruction to the way we think. And it's perhaps the reason why throughout our exile, Kabbalah was very limited by the people who understood it. And still today, if you would try to explain certain Kabbalistic ideas to people, we had our class on Tuesday night about this, they would get stuck, not because they were not able to understand, because the musagim, the terms, the definitions of things that they think about don't fit into the same way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. And they believe that this is a fact. According to Torah, it's not a fact. According to Torah, there are other facts, and there are things that make sense in a different realm. But you have to know, when the world speaks about Aristotle in this book, it's speaking in the same way that we today would speak about scientists. Like, how could you argue with this? Okay, everyone in the facts of their generations. So says the Kuzari, the king, to the rabbi says, you know why you can't believe Aristotle? You know why you can't? Because he doesn't have tradition. He doesn't have tradition. He's not part of this genetic makeup that we spoke about before. He's not part of the people that nachalu chokhmah, that receive divine wisdom from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They're not. And so the Kuzari says, does that mean that we should not believe Aristotle because he doesn't have transmission? So what? He got to the truth. Who cares where he got it from? And here's where you must understand something that we have that no one else has. Our tradition is not just logical, but it's a tradition. Tradition is not the same word in tradition that we try to use. As a Yerusha. I'll give you an example. This rabbi who was injured in Yerushalayim in the terrorist attack, Rabbi Glick. I don't know him personally, but I know of him from the old city when I used to live there. I used to see him walking around and all kinds of things. So the problem was that they're putting out a name to say for Tehillim, and his mother's name they gave X, Y, and Z. The problem is some websites give this name, some give the other name, and most people, I think, I don't remember the name exactly, but it was Rivka Ita Brendel or something like that, right? The problem is that Rivka is not really her name. There's Ita Brendel, and Rivka is a mistake that someone came up with. So now I see the different people arguing with each other, and one person steps in on the internet and says, listen, I know his mother, and his mother told me that her name is X, Y, and Z. No, but who says? Well, we saw it over here from a source that makes sense that it's Rivka. But you can't argue with the facts. You can't argue with somebody who was there. You see, Aristotle, with all due respect to him, could come out to whatever conclusions logically he wants to come to. But you can't argue with a person who says, I was there when God created the world. I was there when Hashem spoke to the people and gave them the Torah. So no matter what logical conclusion you're going to come to, it can never be better than the person who spoke to the mother and said, this is my real name. And that's why Yerusha is so important. That's why inheritance is so important. It's not a joke that we have a Yerusha. It's not a joke. We have a serious tradition of what it is that we believe. The rabbi then says something incredible. And the rabbi essentially says,
I know.
He's too cute.
Let's read this together in English. We read it last week in Hebrew. The rabbi answered, yes, it is. Page 84.
What page?
84. Aristotle was forced to exert his mental efforts regarding the universe because he did not have any reliable tradition from his forefathers. That's why he had to work so hard. See, we don't have to work so hard because we already know. He therefore contemplated the origin and end of the universe. It was very difficult for him to fathom a beginning to the universe, while at the same time it was difficult to fathom the theory of an eternal, timeless universe without beginning. But eventually, using reason alone as his guide, he decided to subscribe to the theory of eternal existence. I mean, Aristotle had two options. Either believe the world had a beginning and has an end, or believe the world always existed. It was very hard for him to accept the fact that the world always existed. But it was equally as hard for Aristotle to believe that the world just came into being. And therefore, between these two, he used his logic to decide, which one do we believe in?
Probably a third he made up.
No, which one do we believe in? The world was created, right? Aristotle said, well, I don't have that tradition. So for me, to pick between the two of them, he used his logic and came out to this theory of eternal existence. I don't know how to pronounce it in Hebrew, but in the books, Hahilayon, Hakadmon, Hilion, Hilayon. Do you know the word I'm saying? Hey, Lamed Yud Vav Nun, Hakadmon. Eternal existence. That's what it means in philosophical terms. When I looked it up, it wasn't even in a Hebrew dictionary. It seems to be maybe a Greek word that was put into Hebrew. I don't know. I can't tell you. So Aristotle, when having to choose between two hard opinions, what did he decide to choose? That the world is eternal. Now, did he do that because the other option was better or worse? He had to come to a logical conclusion, and he forced himself to come to this conclusion. He never saw any reason to ask earlier generations about the age of the universe, or how mankind came into existence. Why didn't he ever ask the earlier generations? Because the earlier generations in his family, they didn't know. They didn't have a tradition.
He's basing his whole philosophy on just
pure
his logic. And it has nothing to do with, it's just like within his own mind.
Pure logic.
That is a pretty big...
Even historians today have come up with the phrase that history did not occur in a vacuum. And you have to understand history, you have to understand the things that came before it. It didn't used to be that way. I mean, this period is this period, that period is that period. Even they have come to this notion that there is the idea that what happened earlier in history had an effect on what happens later in history.
Yeah.
So says the Kuzari, had Aristotle been part of a nation that inherited a tradition of wisdom about creation, which was so thoroughly accepted and deeply embedded, he would have exerted his efforts towards strengthening belief in creation of the universe, despite the philosophical difficulties. Top of 85. Instead of strengthening his theory of eternal existence, which is actually riddled with even greater difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
Did you understand what the Kuzari just said?
He made a rational decision, and he chose this, and it was based on
logic.
Nothing from for logic,
but had he been part of the Jewish people,
he wouldn't have come to that conclusion because he would have had a history.
So what does he tell you? Is Aristotle based on pure logic?
That's kind of what he guesses.
Well,
no, not really. Yes, I know. Yes, he came to a logical conclusion, but that same logic that he used to prove the world is eternal, despite the philosophical difficulties that exist, if he would have been in a place where the persuasion was to believe that there was a creation to the world, he would use the same philosophical arguments to prove that the world had a creation, even though there are difficulties philosophically with that notion.
With the other
and
one
here
too.
is a rule that you must know. And it's a mistake. And the mistake that Jews don't say this. We believe actually the opposite. Why? Because of organizations whose names I will not record, who have come to this whole notion you could prove God, you can prove Mount Sinai. If you hear a rabbi who says he can prove to you that God exists, tell him that he's not Jewish. You can't prove to somebody that God exists. You can't. It's not a proof. You can bring a person to the conclusion that it makes sense that a God exists, but the proof, if you could prove that God exists, then everybody would have to believe that God existed. and there would be no atheists in the world, and no agnostics in the world, and if that was really true, why is that rabbi able to tell you that he can prove that God exists? Because you don't know any better. So he can pull the wool over your eyes and convince you that God exists. But were you a scientist who understood a few things, or were you a philosopher that understood a few other things, you would have some questions to ask that rabbi. The rabbi probably wouldn't know how to answer. It's not because he's not a bad rabbi. Just because it's a fallacy to say that you can prove one way or the other. Can someone prove to me that God doesn't exist? How would you go about proving that God doesn't exist?
You can't take a finite mind to prove something that's really infinite.
No, forget that. That's a philosophical argument that's also flawed. But tell me, can you disprove God's existence?
No.
People do it with facts.
What?
People do that with facts all the time. They give you facts why he doesn't exist. If he existed, there wouldn't be no war, for example.
According to them. Who said? God said there's going to be war.
But that's
Right,
an
it's
opinion.
factual thing, yeah.
Can you
Because
disprove...
they made up a God and then he doesn't fit the picture, so then of course there's no
Could
God.
you
That's not
disprove
true.
that Hashem exists?
No.
No. In the same way you cannot prove that Hashem does exist. And this is not a bad thing. This is not a bad thing. This is at the root of our belief that people have bchira. What is bchira?
Free will.
Free will. If you were not able to have a logical reason, if it was, someone doesn't believe in God, he's an idiot. It's not true. There are very smart people who don't believe in God. And that's the beauty of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a world in which there's a 50-50% chance if you can believe Him or not. And when you choose to go on that and say, I know there's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so you are doing something huge. That's part of your bchira. And someone who chooses not to do so, you can't say, oh, if I would have proven to me that you exist. No, it's not a proof. I don't need to prove to you anything. But this is our yisod. I don't know that we're picking up on this yisod. This yisod is important. The people who tell you you could prove and prove and prove and prove, they're lying to you. And we don't want to prove. Because the moment you prove to people that Hashem exists, now the world lost their bchira. And then all kinds of other things. You reduce HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. Things that don't need to go there. But to know this is a fact. So what he's saying is, and perhaps, by the way, it's off. I don't know. Perhaps, the air conditioning. Perhaps, says Rabbi Uri Sharki, what is the Kuzari suggesting? Had Aristotle lived in the Jewish community, he would have been the Rambam. Had Aristotle lived in the Jewish community, he would have been the Rambam. But because he didn't, so he became Aristotle. And it could be that as an answer to Aristotle, right afterwards, HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent us the neshama of the Rambam. Why? To show you. What did the Rambam do? The Rambam proved Judaism through Aristotle's logic. That's what the Rambam does. Why? Says Rabbi Uri Sharki, could be part of this discussion. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to show you that with the same logic that Aristotle used to say the world is eternal, you could use the same logic to prove that the world must be created. And that's the beauty of our religion. And that's something you have to know. When someone proves to you something, proof alone is not so powerful because you could disprove it with something else. Rather, what's going to be the machriya, what's going to be the decisive between one proof and the other proof?
Your background.
Tradition.
Yerusha. You see, you have a nice proof. I also have a good proof. So what's the truth? I have a tradition.
Well,
Do
one
you
is
have a
proof
tradition?
and one is proven. There's a difference.
Interesting.
Cool.
But let's ask you this question. So I have a proof that the Torah is min HaShamayim. And I have a tradition Torah is min HaShamayim. The other one tells me, you know what? I can prove to you it's not min HaShamayim. And nothing else. What does it have? You have a tradition that it's not min HaShamayim? No. So how did he come to that conclusion? On his own. Good. So I always have my tradition backing me up. In which case, logic on its own is not enough. And tradition on its own is not enough. But when those two join together, says the Kuzari, now we're talking.
There's so many comments. I think it's okay.
Says the Kuzari, Amar al-Kuzari, וכי יש במופת הכרעה תתפשט בשכל. It's not the nosach I have in the Hebrew. וכי יש במופת הכרעה. Just leave it that way. How can the mind entertain an idea if the opposite has already been proven? How can you entertain the idea of creation if you have people who prove to you that the world was not created? How can you even entertain that notion? Meaning, what is he really asking here?
He's assuming that it was...
Aristotle was logical, and then he came to a proof. And how can you tell me, Aristotle's not giving you his opinion. Aristotle proved to you the world always existed. So how could you even entertain the fact that otherwise, if Aristotle already proved it?
But he didn't prove it. He's assuming that he did.
Right, very nice. The Kuzari, and we showed this last time, where the Kuzari says, that word na'amin, we picked up on that subtlety. The Kuzari never really studied Aristotle's logic, because he's now believing Aristotle. He's not knowing Aristotle, he's believing him, na'amin. And so that's his flaw here. He's believing Aristotle because everyone else does, because everyone says it's true. But he never stopped and analyzed Aristotle's arguments for himself. And that's why here, he's going on the assumption that Aristotle proved himself logically. And when someone tells you, don't ask questions, the rabbis already figured it out for you, you just need to do what's right. Because they already worked there. Rambam figured it out, Rashi figured it out. It's the stupidest thing you can tell somebody. So what if the Rambam figured it out, Maran figured it out, Rashi figured it out? But this person needs to figure it out also. So instead tell him, why don't you take those books and study them, and use those books to figure it out on your own. Because once we have Jews, I once saw a missionary get in an argument with a yeshiva boy. And what did the yeshiva boy say? Well, how can you argue with the Rambam? The missionary says, what do you mean, how can I don't believe in the Rambam. No, but the Rambam says that. He says, here's what I'm trying to argue with you. And the guy says, my rabbi has answers to your questions. And the first thing I learned by Rav Peretz, he said, I will not be there to back you up. You're going to be in California. He didn't say this, but I'm speaking of his language. He said, who's going to fight for you? He said, of course you do this because that's what I do. But that's not a good enough reason. Because when someone questions you, what's going to be your answer? So you cannot say, my Rebbe said, so what if your Rebbe said? But you have to know for yourself. That doesn't mean that you don't do it because you didn't get a tradition from your rabbi. It means you got your tradition from your rabbi, but you have to figure it out for yourself also. And that's what the Kuzari didn't do. The Kuzari is accepting Aristotle as fact. And it's not really fact. And now the Kuzari, it's like, it fell on him, it dawned on him. He's now figuring out for the first time. He's telling the rabbi, he's like, wait a second. Are you saying Aristotle came to this conclusion because of personal feelings? Because of an opinion that he had? His opinion was that eternal creation makes sense, and now he's going to prove it? Not the other way around? It's like the story of the guy who was walking in the forest, and he sees all these, arrows on a target. The tree, someone painted a target, and shot the arrow right into the middle of the target. Bullseye, every one of them. So I have to figure out who this guy is. He's amazing. Every tree. So he finds the archer. He says, you're amazing. He says, why? He says, everyone. So I have a secret. So what's your secret? He says, first I shoot the arrow, then I paint it. Yeah? So the same is true. Sometimes people come to a conclusion that this must be the answer, so now I'm going to have to prove it to you. You see this very often, I see in writings of halakha. Why? Because that's what I deal with. You'll see it everywhere else too. But I see it in writings of halakha personally. You can find it in your field, in research projects or other things. The team set out to prove a point. They didn't set out to discover the truth, wherever that's going to take them. And sometimes you'll see like an article, and it will say, this is true, and then they'll tell you in this, our university did a study, the 9 university did a study, and the third place did a study. But why don't you instead start the other way around? Why don't you say, let's discover what is the truth, and then we'll figure out if their studies were right or not. If there are some rabbis and they're going to write a letter in halakha, their point is, this cannot be true. And then they prove to you why it can't be true. Instead of starting off the letter, well, let's figure it out. Let's go to the sources, and wherever the Torah will take us, that's where we're going to end up. And I'm not going to mention names here, but between certain rabbis, I sometimes find that there are two groups of rabbis. Those who want to just accept the truth and figure it out, and those who have a point that they want to prove because that's the way their community thinks, or that's the way their tradition thinks, and then they find themselves stuck. They find themselves stuck in a tradition that they're proving, and they're working so hard to prove, but it doesn't really hold up to what the speculation is against it. I've been speaking recently a lot about Rabbi Yosef Masas, and that's only because I've fallen in love with his writings. He says certain things, and it makes you wonder, why is he the only one who's saying these things in halakha? And that's what blows your mind, because he was the one who says, I'm going to take it from the top, and if my conclusion comes to be different than everyone else's, I'm still going to tell my truth. Okay. And when the Kuzari understands that Aristotle came to a conclusion using logic, even though he already knew what his conclusion was going to be before the logic, suddenly your world of emunah starts crashing down around you. So am I supposed to believe Aristotle? I thought he was the most logical person in the world. Now you're telling me that he was only logical to prove a point that he already knew before he was logical. So what's the point of learning his works? This happens to many people in many different places. It's for this reason that our rabbis tell us that when you choose for yourself a spiritual guide, a rabbi, a teacher, a moreh hawa'ah, halakha, whatever it would be, you have to make sure that you're on the same page with that personality. People say, I'm going to go ask a rabbi a question. It doesn't make a difference what kind of rabbi it is. I saw recently asked a rabbi, can I ask, I'm Sephardic, can I ask an Ashkenazi rabbi a question? Can I ask a Haredi rabbi a question if I'm a religion, so on and so forth. And this rabbi said, yes, you can ask everybody questions, because halakha is halakha, and the answer is going to be the same everywhere. With all due respect to that rabbi, whose whole intention was to bring peace. Don't get stuck on labels and things like that. The truth is that for me, something is important, and therefore my halakha will reflect that. And someone else's halakha that's not important, and that won't reflect that. For example, I had a student said, I want to know which college I should go to. Can I go ask this rabbi? I said, you can ask him, but he doesn't believe you should go to college. So of course it's a question, and the question you ask the same question, but his personal feelings will be, it's not a bad thing, it's true, it's good that a person should be true to themselves. But it means that there is such a thing in the world as a person who is passing off the truth as they see it. They're not lying to you, they see that to be the truth, but it's tainted because of where it is that they're coming from. That's where they're coming from.
Almost everything and everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Which is why the Torah tells us.
In any issue, our personal experiences and whatever coming to play, you can't ignore.
And that's why we have rules for who can be a rabbi, who can be a Talmid Chacham, who can be a teacher. Lo baishan omed v'lo kabdan melamed. Why can a kabdan be teaching? Why can a strict person be teaching? And not just because a strict person won't let people ask questions. That's what I hear. But the Mishnah is telling you, a person who's a kabdan by their nature, that's going to be passed off into their education. And that's going to be passed off into the way they speak. There are people, they love those rabbis that are kabdanim. Why? Because that's what they're looking for, and they found it in a person. And it's not because the Torah is that kind of Torah, but because that person, that's when they see a halakha that knocks people over the head, that's what makes them excited, and that's what they teach people. The other way around. When you find a psak halakha that seems a little bit liberal, open-minded, whatever you like to call it, and you find in the writings of a person who say he was the farthest thing from liberal in the whole world, that's when you know it's true. Because if that's where his truth took him, even though that wasn't his personality, then you know it's true. But if you find a reform rabbi who's always coming out to reform halachot, it's not a proof, because obviously that's where it's going to take you. Obviously. And the same thing is true for Orthodox rabbis. How many Orthodox rabbis are really and honestly going to take certain issues back into the discussion and say, even though we made this decision 100 years ago, are we going to rethink this decision that we made? Chances are not. And even if they pretend to do it, it's really just a fake, because they already know the answer is going to be no. I recently had a discussion, and I'm afraid it's going on the internet, but it's okay. I recently had a discussion in my sukkah. Electricity on Shabbat or on Yom Tov. Now, I am aware that all of the rabbis in our world today, not rabbis from synagogues, like the poskim, Chacham Ovadia, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, or Mordechai Eliyahu, Rav Eliashib, they all held that electricity was not allowed to be used on Shabbat. I agree, so that's why we don't use electricity on Shabbat. But why are you not allowed to use electricity on Shabbat? People tell you because it's a fire, and that means it's a biblical prohibition. I don't know. The proofs that electricity is not fire are numerous.
No, because by
numerous.
turning it, you're doing something.
You're building a circuit. Boneh. Some rabbis want to say it's boneh. Other rabbis prove no, it's not. You're not building a circuit. The circuit was there. So you filled it up with energy, so what? Energy is not considered building. You can't build things out of energy anyways. And what am I sharing with you? How many rabbis would really go back and say, let's reassess this whole prohibition of electricity on Shabbat? They'll pretend to do it, and they'll still come to the same conclusion that it's not allowed. I'm aware that it's not allowed, and therefore we don't use electricity on Shabbat. But to what extent is it not allowed? To this extent that it's a biblical prohibition? the extent that it's a rabbinic prohibition, to the extent that it's a social norm that we've accepted in the Jewish community. So we have to figure that out. But I know that probably people are not going to sit down and figure it out together. And so we're going to have the status quo that electricity is like fire and fire is bad. But it's not intellectually honest. And you're therefore going to have people who are going to break away and start to say, I keep Shabbat except for electricity. And then you're going to cause all other problems. And then you'll have people like, they sent me an email recently, the Shabbat app for your phone, that it helps your phone run in a way that you could use it on Shabbat. And you look at me funny. Why are people doing this? Because we've refused to sit down and reanalyze the whole idea of electricity on Shabbat. And it's like that with so many other things. Because we already know our conclusion. So what's the point of reanalyzing it? And that's not fair. It's not fair to do it to the community. But we do. And that's what Aristotle's doing also. He told the whole world that he used logic. But he lied to them in their face. And it's for this reason that the Gemara tells us, based on the Tanakh has a pasuk, Ki siftei kohen yishmau dat. What does it say? Torat Hashem hayta b'fihu, something like that. It's a verse that says that the lips of the kohen will this, and his mouth will teach Torah. So rabbis say, they learn out this pasuk, Im domeh harav lemalach Hashem tzivot, if the rabbi is like an angel of Hashem, meaning he's good in his behavior and his actions with people, then you should learn Torah from him. And if not, says the Gemara, you're not allowed to. What does that mean? So what if the rabbi is a I don't know, he's an angry person? So what? Who cares? I'm asking him a halacha question. What does it have to do with him being angry? The answer is, the Torah tells you that anger will be a part of his Torah. It will be a part of his Torah. Like you'll see rabbis that were ultra zealots, their Torah comes off as very strict and very harsh. Then you see rabbis that were very lovey and close, and their Torah sometimes comes off as like too soft, too light. Personality affects Torah because we are not angels. We are human beings that are prone to these emotions. Says the rabbi to the Kuzari in words that are not actually written here, you must know that logic is faulty because you will prove whatever it is that you want to prove. And that's the truth. You will prove whatever it is that you want to prove. Our rabbis tell us in the Gemara, Kan darachim, what's kan? Gematria kuf nun. 150 ways letaher et hasheretz, to make the sheretz, the bug, not to make it kosher. There are 150 reasons you can come up with to say that a pig is kosher. Halachically, you could prove it. Does it make it kosher? No. See, our rabbis think logic is faulty. You can't just rely on logic. Rabbi Masas, I quoted him to you, that was a great example. Rabbi Masas has a long letter in which he comes out to a certain halachic conclusion. Namely that you don't need an eruv to carry.
What?
The problem is the first rabbi in history who ever said such a thing, and the last rabbi in history who ever said such a thing. Because he used logic. And his logic didn't take into consideration the opinions of rabbis who we would take into consideration. And it came to a certain point where in the Sephardic community, people stopped learning Rabbi Masas's works. Like, oh, maybe he's lost his mind or something. It wasn't the only thing like that he came to a conclusion to. And I saw a beautiful letter from Rabbi Shalom Masas, his cousin, younger cousin. He says, I know there are rabbis who dare speak about my cousin. He said, but you should know that his logic took him to a place of truth for him. And we all argue with him. Okay, so that's why we don't follow him. But he was allowed to reach a place of logic. But also be aware that his logic didn't come from a bad place. He said, if anybody would know my uncle, he would know he was a Kadosh Anion. He said, the Holy of Holies. He said, and furthermore, I can be a witness that my uncle used an eruv.
No.
My uncle didn't carry outside of the eruv. What he wrote in his letter was like a theoretical discussion he was having with himself.
Because he himself had to follow rabbinical.
Absolutely, of course, and that's the beauty here.
Rabbis that said that it's okay. You couldn't use it.
Exactly, because tradition here is important. Your logic is not enough. You cannot reach conclusions based on your logic. That's why it's important that we have leaders, rabbis, our own rabbis. I have a rabbi, yeah? We all have these things because we need someone to make sure it's not just yourself that matters here. You have to know that it's coming from somewhere. When someone tells me, oh, my custom is to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, but where does that custom come from? So people made up this term that all customs are holy.
No.
Says who? This guy has a custom that he walks backwards when he. That's a holy. It's because So it's made by a rabbi. Fine, I agree. But which rabbi? Where does it come from? In the history of people, you have to trace yourself back to things. We don't just do things stam because that's the way we do things. Tradition is not a Jewish value, and no matter what fiddler on the roof tells us, tradition matches when it fits in with our logic. Logic is also not all that matters. Jews are very into their brains, but logic is not it. We also have a certain submission, a certain hachna. We bow our head to those that came before us and made decisions. Someone sent me a quote today that said that all of his good ideas were already taken by those who lived before him. And there's some truth to that. It doesn't mean you don't have the ability to be innovative. But when you're innovative, you have to make sure that the people before you didn't already think of what you said and either proved it or disproved it or argued with it or accepted it. And when a person's connected to this tradition, I hate that word because it's not the real word, a masoret, a Kabbalah that we have. You're not just another guy in the world making decisions. You're a human being that is riding on the back of people that have been doing things for thousands of years based on logic and the way that Kuzari told them. And when you get married and you say, I'm doing this Kehillat Moshe v'Yisrael, the way Moshe Rabbeinu did it, that literally means the way Moshe Rabbeinu did it. Moshe Rabbeinu did the same exact thing. It's an incredible thing. It's a very powerful experience. And so when a rabbi now changes the ceremony of a wedding and says, oh, it's Kehillat Moshe v'Yisrael, who are you lying to? It's not Kehillat, it's not the way Moshe Rabbeinu did it. And this is the most important point we got out of this class today. Opinions are always going to filter into people's logic and decisions. Myself included, yourself included, everyone's like that. And therefore when you discover the truth, you can't just rely on a person. I remember one of my friends was talking to a rabbi in Yerushalayim. He said, how can you do that? He said, I rely on Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. It's not about Chalad Yisrael. I know everyone thinks Rabbi Moshe Feinstein is the only thing he ever wrote was about Chalad Yisrael. Moshe Feinstein wrote 9 volumes of halachic tshuvas, brilliant works. Not the only thing he ever talked about was milk. And it was a brilliant Talmid Chacham. And this rabbi told him, he said, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein went up to Gan Eden, and he was there. And he knew all the answers to the questions. He said, but when you go up to Gan Eden, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein isn't going to be there to answer your questions. So you can't tell me, I rely on Rabbi Moshe. Who are you relying? You have to make a conclusion that makes sense, that you can back up. So what that Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said something? Doesn't mean so what that he's a nobody. But you're not him. And you have to know how to, if you can explain yourself like Rabbi Moshe could, then you can do it. But if not, so why are you relying on people for? And that's true with our Judaism, that's true with our personal life, that's true with everything that we do. Aristotle, as brilliant as he was just another person who had logical ideas that he was forcing into what he already had a pre-existing notion of. And that's what we have to be careful of. So we should know how to use our logic properly, and God willing, only come out to conclusions that fit our tradition, which is that Kadosh Baruch Hu exists, that He is one, the world is one, and B'ezrat Hashem we'll only see good things from that. God willing, next week we're going to continue into a much deeper discussion on this topic about was Torah proved, not proved. Can a Jew actually believe that the world was eternal and still be considered Jewish? We're going to see a machloket. The Maharal says yes, no, and the Rambam says yes. The Rambam says yeah, a Jew can believe that this matter was always here and it was reformed. And Maharal says no, we believe in creation. Creation. So this is before the Shlosh Tzaddikim were all agreed upon by everybody. The 13 attributes of the Rambam are not agreed on by everybody. It's true that we want everyone to believe in the 13 attributes. The Arizal, for example, didn't believe in the 13 attributes of the Rambam. Of course he believed in them. If you ever look in the Sephardic Siddur, it will say, we sing here Adon Olam, v'Arizal haya nimna mela'omro. And Arizal wouldn't. What does Arizal have with Adon Olam? What's his problem with Adon Olam? Adon Olam is a song based on the 13 principles of the Rambam. The Rambam says, if you believe in these 13 principles, you are a Jew. And if not, all kinds of bad things the Rambam writes over there. And the Arizal says, with all due respect, dear Rambam, why these 13? Why not 10 more? Maybe there are 100 principles, maybe there are 613 principles. He didn't agree that you could concentrate Judaism down to 13. And therefore the Arizal says, I'm not going to sing this song. Not because he didn't believe in those 13, he just believed there were more. And that is the beauty of Judaism. And the Ben Ish Chai says in his town that they would sing Adon Olam, and he would always try to get them to stop. So I once asked the rabbi what he does, and the rabbi said, they sing it and I just sing la 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 la. Right? But I'll tell you the truth is, the Rambam, for us, that's the difference. The Rambam said 13. When we get to the level of the Arizal to know which ones are more, which ones are less, we can get to the level of the Arizal. And to the point where, and this one I'm going to go off record, everyone should have a beautiful week.